Emily.
You bet.
Okay.
Okay, there you
Lisa,
go.
we're finally good to go. I'm going to let you have the floor and tell us all about this wine and your winery.
All right, so I'll start off. I'll just tell you a little bit about our winery to start, and then we can start drinking. Actually, yeah, it looks like everybody's drinking already. Cheers.
You don't have
But yeah, everybody. Boy, this has gotten me through the last month. So we're a really small boutique winery in the warehouse district in Woodinville. I just finished my 11th harvest. We started the winery in 2013. Before then, I did some winemaking with John Patterson at Patterson Cellars. And also I did a harvest with Chateau Ste. Michelle. And part of working for John was I made a couple barrels, and then the next year I made a couple more, and then there was a space that came open next to him, and he's like, you know, you should take that space next door and your 6 barrels. So I did, and my 6 barrels is now, we're at 60 barrels this year, and it just kind of, you know, this is my second career. I spent the first half of my life or career in technology, working for a couple of high-tech companies and also a couple of startups. And my intention when I came to wine was to kind of help them market and promote wine. But once I started working with John, I had to learn the whole process of what having a winery was about. And part of that was working a harvest. And I just fell in love with the process. I love spending time in the vineyards with the growers, and I loved watching the fruit come in and touching it. I'm a very tactical person. And so it just like lit something up inside of me that, you know, I wanted to like see this from grape to bottle. And so, yeah, I've been doing it for 11 years. And the wine we're having tonight, I'm really glad you picked this one. This is a 2014 Merlot. It is, she's a little bit older. She's a little bit more mature. But what I really love about her is that she's aged beautifully. The acidity on this wine is stunning. The structure is beautiful. There's still so much fruit, and it's like boysenberry and a little bit of baking spices, and it's just the whole package. I think this wine is really, really nice and really enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got some years left on it too for being 14. It'll have no problem 2 or 3 years down the road as well. It'll probably even get better with time here.
Yeah, and this is, you know, Red Mountain and Kiona Vineyards, which is one of the oldest vineyards in the state. I love the family. I love their story, and these are their old vine Merlot that we've been able to get. And yeah, there's a reason why it's such a premier growing region in the state of Washington.
What drew you away from your initial career to wine? Was there a wine that drew you into wine, or was it the I guess the love story that people think of as being a winemaker? What brought you this way?
So I grew up in Hawaii. I moved to Oregon and went to school in Oregon, but I went to Oregon State, which was kind of close to wine country. A lot of my friends, worked harvests. I just kind of fell in love with Pinot there. I don't make any Pinot, but I do like kind of those earthy, deep forest floor type of Pinots there. And I more was just a connoisseur. I just really appreciated wine. I knew how my families from Europe, so I know that wine and food are a natural connection. Um, and and so I mean, it was. I just wanted to. It was kind of a cool thing to create a wine. Or create something that had history, that was a living thing, that would bring people together. And some of the best times in my life have been over, you know, a great bottle of wine with great friends and great food. And to be able to create that is a pretty cool thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, Oregon's not, I mean, that's not a bad spot to kind of walk into it either. So some beautiful wine.
Okay.
So as you started your first vintage, you said you had, I think it was six barrels before you moved to kind of your own space. What were the first grapes that you started working with?
So Syrah was one of the first grapes, and Cab and Merlot. And I've got to say, when I initially started this, I will always, Merlot is probably one of the most, I think, underrated varietals, especially in the state of Washington. I think it drinks like a Cab. It has everything you want in a wine. It has great structure. It has great fruit. And it ages well. I mean, it's like, I don't think there's another place that makes Merlot quite as unique as we do here in Washington State. And when I initially started making wine, I was like, I'm just going to make Merlot, and I'm going to make it from each of the AVAs. And I was quickly told that was not such a good idea. And the reason is unfortunately Merlot gets, you know, people think it's a second class grape, and it definitely isn't. And yeah, so drink a lot of Merlot. But anyway, so my love for Merlot has always been there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Sideways kind of hampered it. It's one of the few grapes where you can see that direct connection from a pop culture reference really kind of killing a market. I think it's coming back though.
It definitely is.
Definitely.
Lisa, did you were you aware that in the Gildsam Washington Wine Symposium this year in January, they actually had a masterclass on Washington Merlot versus kind of the more global styles and kind of how it's making a comeback, and did a whole presentation on the whole deal. We tasted through about four Washingtons and four global Merlot styles, and it was a lot of fun. But the general consensus among the community is that it's kind of starting to make a comeback, and this newer generation of winemakers is really embracing it as a style, because it's really not as they don't feel the same way about that kind of history that it has and that kind of negative connotation that Merlot brings a lot of the time.
Yeah,
definitely was one of our favorite barrels of what we produced this year. So now that there are so many more AVAs, is that still a project you would undertake?
I might. You know, it is interesting being a winemaker, and like, I do make things I like. I mean, I love what I make, but sometimes you make things that you necessarily wouldn't make because your consumers would like to see you make those. And the perfect example this year is I usually do a Chenin Blanc, but we had an early frost this year and we lost that fruit. So I was really struggling, like I needed a white for my consumers, my wine club. And so I've been a little resistant to Chardonnay. I do 100% Roussanne, and that's kind of a little bit of oak, a little bit of structure white wine. But I decided I was able to get some Chardonnay. So we took some Chardonnay grapes and we fermented it in stainless steel, unoaked, cold temp. And I'm really, really happy with the way this wine's turned out. And I would have said, no, I'm not making Chardonnay. And now I'm really happy I made Chardonnay. And we're going to release it on May 2nd. So I'm super excited to see what our wine club thinks of this wine. Yeah.
I think, I mean, Chardonnay is an interesting grape, right? Again, it's kind of one of those ones that's picked up a little bit of an odd stigma. I find it to be one of the, I mean, I won't even say one of them. I find it probably the best white wine grape in the world. You know, even though there's some pretty bad expressions of it, there's just some absolutely beautiful expressions. So I'll look forward to trying yours. as you were kind of growing as a winery, what did you find to be some of the growing pains from going from that 6 to 60 odd barrels now?
It's a lot. I mean, the thing is I love what I do. I'm really, really lucky, but I wear a lot of hats. I market, I manage, I clean up, I make wine, but I also get in there, and it's a very physical job. And so, as we've grown, it's gotten to be more work. But it is one of those things where it there are challenges, but the rewards are so great. And the greatest reward, I think, is just this community is awesome. Like so I was in a tech world where it was a little, like you get to the top and you push people down, or it's very dog eat dog. This one, I mean, we've got such a really amazing community. And like, even during this whole COVID thing, people are really coming out in force to help each other out, to support and help promote everybody else in this industry. And so it's really, I mean, I always go back to the word community. I feel like super fortunate to be a part of it.
Absolutely. It's I think I've definitely found the same thing. It's the exception when you find somebody who's unwilling to answer a question or lend you a quick piece of equipment that you're short on.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. And you learn too, like one of the things for me, I did go through, I went, Lake Washington Tech had a 2-year certificate program. I did that. And then I did the Lake Washington Enology program. So it is like, I always say, I'll have young people come and say, I want to be a winemaker. And they've had no experience really in what it takes to make wine. And definitely you can learn, but you need to apprentice and work with someone. And I always say, go work a harvest and then come back and we'll talk, because it is really, it's really hard work. But you also have to have a basic understanding of chemistry and biology and how to keep wine clean and free of microbials. All this stuff is super important. And so I always say, like, people want to get into this. And one of the things I would say is get your knowledge. Make sure you either have a very strong someone to mentor you, or and actually you should do both. Get some basic training when it comes to making wine.
Absolutely. It's they're both valuable in very different ways, because some of that textbook training is maybe not applicable in the same way that a mentor who's done it for 20 harvests will tell you, yeah, that's great, but that's really not how we do not how we do it.
Right.
And it can kind of give you an upper hand in shortcuts. It's not that you can't do it either way, but having both is definitely helpful to have those two pathways. Did you have a mentor outside of, you said you worked Patterson and you worked Saint Michelle? Was there somebody at one of those facilities that you really felt gave you a leg up?
So I will say John Patterson has been amazing, and he still is, because he's my next door neighbor. So if I need to borrow something or need help, this is the thing that I love about wine too. You learn something every year. Mother Nature gives us something different every year to deal with. And the true winemakers are those that roll with the punches, right? Like, you have to vary your plans sometimes. Hence, like the Shannon, we didn't get it, so we did Chardonnay instead. So you have to, you have to be willing to ask questions. You're not going to know everything. And I think the best winemakers are those that will go and ask those questions and don't pretend that they have all the answers. Because it, like I said, it's every year's different. Every not only AVA is different, but varietals, soils, terroir. I mean, this was the interesting thing this year with the freeze. There were literally places where part of the crop, just at the angle it was fine, and those that kind of fell into the valley where the frost hit was lost. So yeah, I think knowing I'm really happy that but I work in the warehouse district, and if some of you like I call it like incubator area of winemaking. It's a lot of small wineries. Most of the folks have their day jobs, and they're making wine evenings and weekends. And the really cool thing about being there is you meet a lot of different winemakers, and you're just gathering around. And John Patterson has done custom crush for a number of small wineries. But, when I started, it was Mark McNeely and Chris Gorman and Darby and all those guys out in the alley. And you got to see what they did, and they would answer questions. So it was like, I just felt like I had a lot of valuable exposure and folks to kind of show me and answer questions for me. So, it probably goes back to that whole thing about, just being in a great community.
Definitely. Absolutely. It's, as you were saying, it's the winemakers that ask questions, and it's also the winemakers that accept that the more they spend time in wine, the more they don't know about the wine.
Yeah.
For those of you guys on the call that she was talking about, a freeze, it's about the third week of October this year. We got a pretty nasty freeze where there was a lot of fruit left on the vines. Our winery made it out totally fine. I don't know how you guys fared. A lot of people kind of took a little bit of a beating. Some fruit was not, a lot of fruit really couldn't be used, and some people still tried to use some of it. How did you guys fare out of that?
So the only fruit I lost was the Chenin and Mourvedre, and I did. We had some Mourvedre, which is in the Red Mountain area that we lost, but I also pulled some Mourvedre out of Warr-King Slope, and this is the thing. Like different growing areas, and Warr-King Slope did not get. They don't seem to deal with the frost; they deal with fires, and luckily we didn't have any fires this year. So we did great. I mean, and I tend to be an early picker. When I look at numbers, and winemakers, everybody looks at different numbers. You taste fruit, you look at fruit, but we also look at pH of juice, and it's really acidity and pH that we look at. I always look at the number on acidity. Part of the reason there is I like wine that has a little bit more acidity to it. It doesn't have to be gigantic bricks or big sugars. I don't necessarily make high alcohol wines. I really do try to go old world style with our wines. So we have acidity on our wines, which means I pick a little earlier, so the bricks are lower. We also don't use a whole lot of oak. We use a little bit of oak for structure, but a lot of our oak is once used or neutral oak. And really my philosophy there is I want you to taste the fruit itself. Like I want you to taste what a Washington Merlot tastes like. I want you to taste what a Washington Cabernet tastes like. And when I say this, I do a lot of single varietals, but I also have started to branch out and do a few more blends as well too.
Well, that oak usage plays a little bit to your old world style as well, where, I mean, unless you're one of the big chateaus in Bordeaux, most people are using, probably 10 to maybe 25% new oak just to be affordable in most old world regions. And I think that's something that we kind of lose sometimes in the States, because we have had access to the capital to have a lot of new oak in a lot of our wines. And so we're not necessarily used to these old world structured wines that I think are really, like you said, food friendly. Can be a really nice way to make wine. So now how many varietals do you work with at this point?
Okay, now I got to count them off. About 14, I think. I brought Mourvedre into the fold a couple years ago, and Mourvedre is an interesting grape. Syrah was challenging for me at first, so I always describe Syrah, and this is like it goes through its pimply teenager stage, where it's super awkward. It's like just that awkward 14-year-old boy. But it rides through this, and then you have to be patient with it. And then it kind of comes out the other side. And then all of a sudden you've got this, incredible, wine that's done that. Mourvèdre's like that too. It goes through, I call it the stinky feet stage, where there's a period when you're early in fermentation. We actually do a lot of addition of oxygen to kind of prevent that. And then we rack a lot and it's part of the learning process. So as I've gotten to know Mourvèdre a little bit better, I know, oh, if I don't do this, then I'm going to deal with that stinky feet smell. But we no longer have to do that. So yeah, so we brought Mourvèdre into the fold. We've done Cab, Merlot, Syrah. Those are our staples. I do Roussanne. I've done Roussanne since the very beginning. I fell in love with Roussanne when I was in France, and I found a little bit of it here early on when I first started making wine with Roger Gamache up at Gamache Vineyards, and I've had the same block since I started. And Roussanne is really an intriguing wine. It has the weight of a Chardonnay, but it's much more exotic. It's kind of got this kind of jasmine, kind of honey note to it. It's just very complex, and I've really liked that one too. And I make a Riesling, and I do it in an Alsatian style. It's very bone dry. I pull the fruit out of Wallach Slope, which has this kind of great soil that kind of gives it this lime kind of quality about it. Very minerality is the word for it that I love. What else do we do? Oh, I do 2 rosés. And this year, because we had an early, it got cold fast, I decided to do a Petit Verdot rosé, 100%.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was interesting because lots of acidity. So I had to play with how I managed the sugar and when I shut down fermentation. So there is residual sugar, but you don't really taste it because the acidity is much higher. I also do 100% Syrah rosé too. That's something I also learned in France, as well as that they don't do, there's a process called saignée, which is what we call bleeding off of a wine. And we do it a lot with reds. And before we start fermenting, to darken the color or to intensify the reds, we'll pull some of the juice off. But I learned that a technique where we go direct to press. So there's no saignée. The fruit goes in really cool, goes into the press, and we press and watch the press cycle very carefully. So we're extracting to a certain level, but not too much from the skins. So yeah, and that we've done for, I think this is my 4th year doing that. And that one we call Marie Noel, and she's the woman in France. She was the grandmother of an exchange student of ours, and they owned a vineyard in Provence. And so I spent some time with them, and it was kind of cool. I had no idea she was a winemaker, and then I went to visit, and there it was. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's very cool. I'd really like to try that PV rosé. I don't think I've ever had one.
Yeah, I've found a couple, but I've always loved Petit Verdot, and most people don't know. It's kind of one of those grapes that you don't see a lot of single varietals, but I'm going to tell you, most winemakers use Petit Verdot in their blends. It just adds a little bit of floral. It always gives wine a nose.
Yeah, on our last call, we were talking with Andrew Martinez, and he makes a single varietal, and he was actually just talking about how it's one of his favorite varietals. And I think we were discussing that I think it's getting very close to being the most expensive grape in the state now. It's become really popular. It's a beautiful grape.
Yeah, everybody needs it.
Everybody needs it. I can't agree with that more. We're going to go through a couple questions because people have been throwing a bunch in. One of them was they were saying that they didn't detect much oak on the palate, and was asking if it's oak. You kind of went through that. The next one was, what is your favorite AVA to grow Merlot from?
Whew, that's a hard one. So I kind of bounce back and forth between 2. Wallach Slope. I work with Weinbau Vineyards there. And if you ever get the chance to meet Miguel, who's managed that vineyard for 40 years, he's managed out there. He is an incredible guy, and he knows how to grow grapes so well. So I do from Winebound, and then the other one is Kiona with Scott, and these are old vines too. So I really like old vine Merlot is what I really choose. Now, when I make a cab, I actually pull old and young vines. So our cab is both Quintessence Vineyard and Kiona Vineyard. And I think just blending and having the option with both of those from the same AVA gives the wine just the complexity with the old and the young.
Yeah, definitely. Is there, I'll add on to this question. Is there an AVA that would really, or a vineyard really even, that you'd really like to try Merlot from?
Let's see. An AVA that I really like to try. Well, I love Walla Walla Merlot. I think Walla Walla does a really nice job. And I love the fruit that comes out of Walla Walla. One of my challenges is because I'm super small, transportation can be a real pain for me to get fruit back and forth over the mountain. I have my truck, I get a trailer. I've gone over there, knock on wood. I've never had to deal with a flat tire. Only my truck broke down only once, but it was on the way over there. But it's, Walla Walla tends to be a little rougher for me to get over there. But I'm really happy. I've really worked hard to get into the vineyards that I have. And part of the process when I first started out, nobody knew who I was. It was kind of the vineyard managers kind of have to take a leap of faith because they want to make sure you're going to make good wine and represent them correctly. So I've really tried to work to get in. One of the ones that I had been trying to get in for a very long period of time was Stillwater Creek Vineyard. Every year I'd send Ed Kelly, the vineyard manager, a note and say, hey, I love your fruit. I love your wine. Everybody who makes wine out here, I'd love to get some of your fruit. And he'd be like, yeah, I don't have anything. And then one of the owners of the vineyard came to a tasting and she tried my wines and she said, hey, I love all your wines. She said, she handed me her card and she said, do you know this vineyard? And I said, oh my goodness, do I know your vineyard? And it was nice because that year I got in. So yeah, I'm I get a little OCD about when I want something or a grape I want to make, and I try to go and I try to taste wines from other winemakers that are getting fruit from those vineyards, so I can kind of think stylistically, is this going to match with what I want to do?
That's a great way to do it. It's a really fun way to do it too. It gives you kind of a roadmap of where you can go. That's a lot of fun. Let's see. So somebody asked, how did you get the name Warr-King?
Okay, good question. So I'm first generation here. My family's from the UK. My father is. And Warr-King is actually my family name. It's been in my family for 5 generations. It's been hyphenated that way. There's multiple stories regarding the hyphen and how it came about. And the best story I like, it might not be true, but I like to tell it is, I had a linguist come in once and he said, well, your name is always related to what your family did, for work. And so his call was that it was the warrior to the king. My family was. So I like that story. I like to tell that story. But no, that's where the name is. It's my family name. And the whole poppy is, it comes from my dad's family. They fought in the wars, both the women and the men. There were women in my family on the, in the support roles there too. So that was kind of a nod to my family as well too. So
yeah, I really like the label. It's like the colors, really enjoy the colors a lot.
Good designer. She's in Kennewick, Sarah Nelson. She's awesome.
She did a great job. Next question. So someone was asking me, is there a correlation between alcohol content and bricks? I'll let you just kind of talk about how that works from a scientific standpoint.
Yeah, so bricks is a measurement of sugar. And we all know that, yeast like sugar. And that's how they make alcohol. So there's different philosophies. Lots of winemakers have different philosophies regarding where they want bricks to be at, how long they want fruit. The longer you hang fruit in the vineyard, the higher your bricks will become. I do think there are some other environmental factors that play into that too. Like if you get, I think there's, people have different philosophies too. I think there's at some point where the grapes decide we're done and they start to shut down. And you can sometimes let them hang, but I do think you risk some degradation to the grape itself when you do that. So yeah, I don't usually pick anything over 26 bricks. Now, when I say that, there are years that we get super surprised, like 2015 was one heck of a year for a lot of winemakers here. It was the hottest year we had on record. And so you're trying to get your acid to drop and you're trying to get your, sugars to go up. And so it's this kind of fine dance between the two. But I'm trying to remember what the measurement of sugar the rate varies. It's gone from 55 to 63, I think, for the conversion from alcohol to sugar. But I'm thinking of 15%, that's about what, 26, 27 bricks, I believe.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you'll see different words in other countries for that same thing, but Bohm and Auslese are different in German, and you'll see those in France as well. And we use bricks, and they all have different conversion rates. So winemakers get to have a blast trying to figure all that out. Next question is, you do visit the vineyards where your grapes come from, but how often, and what are you looking for when you're out in the vineyard?
So I usually go out a lot early. I usually August 15th is when I start visiting, and we don't, the grapes are there. We're just checking on really what the shape of the vineyard is. And just, I like to touch base with my vineyard managers. We're in a really different place, right? There are a lot of, like, when I was in Europe and I talked to winemakers and they're like, what do you mean you don't grow your own fruit and you're making wine? I'm just like, yeah, that's kind of how we do it here in Washington State. But it's one of those where, and every vineyard I work with is really experienced and has been doing this for a very long period of time. So I do start going in August. I start just kind of checking to see what's going on, talking to the vineyard manager, seeing what are we dealing with, bugs, what are we looking at for the harvest. And then I probably try to go over every 2 weeks. And then what kind of happens to me is, by middle of October, I'm full up at the winery, and which means I have to be there for fermentation. Sometimes I can get samples pulled by people that are going over to the vineyard. I'll get them to send pictures of fruit. But I really trust the vineyard managers at that point. They know what I want, and they kind of will tell me. I'll look at the numbers every day and get on the phone with them and talk about it. But yeah, at some point, that's the hard part, is once we start rolling and I'm the workhorse, that I can't leave the kids that are fermenting alone in the cellar. They cause problems then.
So you talked about the bricks and the acidity. Are there physical characteristics on the grapes when you're looking at the clusters that you're looking for? That could start before the grapes are even out as well. But what do you look for when you're out there, say in August versus September or October?
So September, October, the thing that I'm not, and some people like this, the grapes will start to shrivel. I'm not a huge fan of the grape shriveling. I really, and it varies by varietal. At that point, I think the grape is starting to degrade, and there's a certain level of that, right? And it depends on the year as well. And you're also looking at the numbers, but it's like you're looking and you're tasting. The other thing is you're tasting the fruit. One of the things all winemakers look at is the seeds. Like, we break it open, we taste seeds. You want to make sure they're brown and not green, but they also can create a bitterness, I think, when they start to age too much. So Yeah, it's all those factors we're looking at. Are we dealing with, has it been rainy and then hot? Because that causes all kinds of problems. Then we deal with, bunch rot and all these other things. So it's just like, it's so many things. You're always like, all the balls are in the air and you're hoping you catch them all. And yeah.
And it's almost impossible to catch them all, right? It's like you said, there's always something every year, right? And you have to deal with it.
Right.
Let's see. Tell me a little bit about, so you were talking about the Warr-King slope having challenges with fires, and while we haven't had that the last couple of years, can you talk a little bit about how you dealt with that when we did have those in 15, 16, 17 maybe?
Yeah, so we've been really lucky, and it depends on, the big thing too is when the fires hit. And when I was at Chateau Ste. Michelle, that's when we most dealt with smoke taint, or my first experience with it. And one of the things that we really have to, and the weird thing is it was 2016 or 17, where, remember, we had that weird thing come in where it was between California and British Columbia, and
Yeah.
they were having all these fires, and it made like greenhouse impact over us. Well, what happened that year was, it just basically, the grapes didn't degrade or they weren't tainted. It was like it shut down photosynthesis. So where we were just growing, everything looked good, all of a sudden we got this like stop. And it was, the grapes weren't able to do photosynthesis to finish the process. And luckily it cleared and we were able to get through that. But that was a weird year. 2017 was really weird. Smoke taint for us has been, like I said, when it's hit Warr-King, it hasn't been at the key development stages of fruit, which has been, knock on wood, a good thing. I was in Paso. Actually, I was, where was I? I wasn't in Paso. It was down Temecula. And I was tasting through some of their wines, and they're like, oh, and they were selling, this is a lovely smoky wine. And I'm like, smoke taint. But you can get it in the palate, but most people, like, you have to like know what it tastes like to figure it out. But there are ways we can work around it. Like, whites, you just are really careful about how you press. It's really, you do gentle press cycles. You don't want a lot of extraction out of the skins, because that's where the smoke taint hides. Yeah, and you try and do it, once again, temperature is super important when you process that fruit.
Yeah, that's something we haven't had to deal with. And it is really interesting how people will try and spin it when they do have smoke taint. I think my brother and I were down in Temecula last year. We may have tasted that same wine. But yeah, it's when you hear somebody talk about smoke as an aroma in a wine, it's very much not the smoke that you get from smoke taint. Smoke taint it's very overt and much more like a campfire, as opposed to just kind of a wafting smell of smoke. It can be very intense and really can wreck a wine. I didn't know that about the whites. I didn't know that really, my experience with white and smoke taint have not been good, and it usually just wrecked them, but knowing that you can press soft is kind of cool. So the question here is, do you purchase the rights to the grapes, to the harvested grapes? Hold on, the phone. Sorry about that. I'm trying to. Do you purchase the rights? Hold on. Okay, so do you purchase the rights to the grapes or the harvested grapes? If the former, do you still have to pay full committed value if the harvest is lost?
Yeah, so it's like when we lost the Mourvedre, there's an insurance thing. Most of the vineyards have it. Now the one gotcha is that they have to take a loss on all the fruit, not just some of the fruit. Same with our Chenin. I was just like begging him. I'm like, please, 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 I don't care. I'll take it. I'll work with it. I'll see what I can make. And it was like, he didn't want, because then you can't make the insurance claim. So it's not us, it's really the growers that get hit there. We do carry, I carry a contract. So it's a long-term contract that I carry with all of our vineyards. The only one I don't is with Kiona, and he's just kind of a handshake guy. And part of that is what he doesn't sell, they make their own wine, and he usually can, they utilize those grapes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways in talking with different people. The contracts can range wildly from, like you said, a handshake, all the way up to, it could be the winemaker's loss, depending on, what the winemaker stipulated, how long they want them on, certain things like that. It can vary quite a lot.
Right, and that is the catch when you take when you buy certain, if you make requests for how you crop it, and do certain things in the vineyard, you're right, there is a different contract for winemakers that want to do that kind of thing.
So we were talking with an Oregon winery last Wednesday, and the question here is, what makes Willamette better for Pinot Noir than Washington? Most Washington Pinot bums us out.
I have to totally agree on that one. I have yet to see a Washington Pinot that I'm super crazy about. Now, one thing though that they are starting to grow some out on Bainbridge Island, some of the cooler climates, and it'll be interesting to see how those age and come together. But I think Oregon, it's the temperature and it's the soils down there. I think they're more, how do you say, they're more dense, they're more almost damp. They're not as dry as they are here. We seem to have more sandy, more loamy, now when I say that, Yakima maybe is a little bit like Oregon, but I think it's the soils and it's the temperature and the climate, and you get that that ocean kind of, that fog that comes in there. I think that's one of the key things that makes that incredible terroir down there.
Yeah, and I think one thing to mention about Pinots is, compared to a lot of the red wine grapes that we grow in Washington, they're very thin-skinned. Yeah. And so they don't do as well with the prolonged heat that we get, and sometimes it just causes them to ripen too fast before you can develop kind of the phenolic compounds that you want to really make a great wine. And so Oregon kind of allows for a little bit slower ripening process, like she was saying, from the fog coming in, and that can make a huge difference for Pinot. And as she said, the soils, I think you're right on that. I think those play a huge role. I also think it's possible that we may have just not planted quite the right places for Pinot in this state, and maybe some of those cool areas like Chelan could potentially at some point maybe make a Pinot that won't bum you out. I don't know. Another question just kind of rolled in as a tag along here. I don't know if you have any experience from Pinot out of Okanagan in Canada.
You know what? I went up there last spring to Kelowna. Oh my gosh, I love it up there. I think awesome. I have talked about it a lot. If you haven't been there, you need to go. They're making really great wine, super nice people. Tasting rooms are beautiful. The price point is fabulous. I was actually, after Temecula, I went to Kelowna and I was so happy.
Yeah, it's a really cool growing region.
Yeah, it really, and the restaurants, there's a lot of young chefs coming online there. And I love what they're doing with the native varietals up there too.
Yes. Yeah. And it's really cool because, you go right up to the border and you have these really full-bodied, Bordeaux style Cab Merlot wines. And then you go north to those far reaches up there within the same AVA, and, you're growing pretty heavy acid Riesling and sparkling wines. And it just, you get a lot of really cool variation, and yeah, definitely, if you haven't been up there, go.
When they let us in again.
Yeah, when they let us go again. Don't. We're not endorsing running the border.
No,
don't do that.
Not now.
So this was a question about how you transport grapes east to west, and whether they're processed first at the vineyard, and what form are they in. For really when you get, I guess we'll say, the west side here.
So we transport in half-ton picking bins that we leave in the fields. that we bring over whole fruit. I know a lot of different winemakers do a lot of different things. Some they'll do crush and press on the other side and then just transport over juice. Like I said, when I start moving in October, I'm getting my friend Joe to dry fruit and bring it back over for me. So I don't necessarily I want to look at it. I want to see it. I want to know how to handle it. And so we do all our crushing and pressing on this side of the mountain. So we try to get over there really early. And usually we can get the fruit picked by 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And then we just get on the road and get it back over here. And the reason is we want to keep it cool. If it's really hot, I've done where we've just put some dry ice to kind of keep the temperature down. Our goal is to just get it over here and get it processed. And we do it all over here. I know it's crazy, but
no, it's the best. It's the best way to do it. We have a cool trailer too. It makes it really exciting on some of the passes.
Yeah, getting over that pass. Some of the weather has been really interesting.
You want to stack that, 5th picking bin on it, and you're like, maybe I shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I
have a picture.
Yeah, maybe a picture. Here it is. It's a great picture.
It was Beverly Hillbillies.
You have it right. Don't try this at home type of picture. There's some other ways that people do it where there are some logistics companies that in theory will move your grapes for you. I'm not super sold on them doing a fantastic job.
The hard part there is, it's basically when you're small, it's super hard. And they do transport, but they, normally it's the next day or it rolls in for us late at night and you don't get to process it until the next morning. I'm kind of weird about that too. Like I'd rather process the fruit at 2 p.m. than wait till 9 the next morning.
Yeah. I think there are definitely advantages to doing it that way. Somebody says that there's farmhand wineries. They're out of Kennewick, but they have their Pinot in Leavenworth, and they say they like that one. So maybe we should try that one.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your wine club.
Okay, so I love my wine club members. They're awesome. And we have awesome parties. I just want to tell you that. We usually have a pig roast every May. We didn't get to have it this year. We were hoping to do it in June, and now we can't do it. So anyway, when this is all over, we're going to have one heck of a party. But our wine club is, we do 2 releases a year. It's 6 bottles in the spring, 6 bottles in the fall. And then I do optional releases, and they're mainly different projects that we have that are out of the norm. Like this year I did a wine called Tenacity and Mouton Noir. They're very different looking than our label here. But Tenacity was, it's 75 Mourvedre, 25 Syrah. And we partnered with an organization called Spin Girls, which is, helps girls in the Seattle School District, girls of color, get involved in STEM. And so we're super excited to be working with them, and all the proceeds from this wine are gonna go to Spin Girls. So it's off the norm. So we just make those available to our wine club, and they can buy them, but it's an optional. We only require a case a year. And our discounts are really great. Like 1 to 5 bottles, you get 15% off. 6 to 12 bottles. Oh, she found the label. Yeah, see how different it is? 6 to 12 is a 20% discount, and over a case is 25%. And like we try to be super generous with our wine club members because they are our best evangelists, and they are our biggest supporters, and they have been unbelievable during this weird time where we haven't been able to open our tasting room.
I think that's one of the really underrated things that the United States has done really well, is built a really cool direct to consumer following for their wineries, and it creates a really cool relationship between the winemakers and the winery staff and the clients, where you can have pig roasts, and, that's the best part.
Yeah.
So this is a math question, and it varies, I think, probably wildly by producer, but how many bottles will you get out of a ton of grapes, or how many cases maybe?
So it really, and I will say it varies on the year, right? So this last year we had really low yields. The year before we had really high yields. So normally a ton you end up with 3 barrels, which is 75 cases. Sometimes it can be 100 cases. And it depends on how the winemaker makes the wine. It could be 50 cases. Yeah, but I would say for us, it's about 75 cases per ton.
Yeah, I think, it just, it really does depend, like you said, on year to year and winemaker to winemaker. The follow-up question to that was barrel, and that's usually about 25, which you kind of implied there, about 25 cases per barrel. So I'm just gonna kind of like wrap up a little bit here by asking you a little bit more about the Kiona Vineyard and the Merlot within that, and kind of what we've tasted the 14, but you've tasted all these different vintages that have kind of come out of this vineyard, and tell me a little bit about how maybe this one compares, and why you really enjoy that vineyard for your Merlot.
So meaning, why do I really like the 2014 Merlot?
No, why do you like Kiona for Merlot, and how
got
does the 2014 compare to any of your other vintages, and maybe what has been kind of your favorite vintage from that?
Yeah. So it is interesting. Like when you say that the 2014 and the 2015, we have them both, and they're really interesting to try side by side. Remember, 2015 was the hottest year we had. So I feel like this is more old world, and the 15 tends to be a little bit more new world. It's a little more jammy, a little more, little broader shoulders than the 14. Seems a little bit more elegant. I like Kiona Vineyards a lot because I think, one, I love the family. They're awesome. They've been doing this for a very long time, and my hats and my heart go out to all these growers, because this is not an easy life they have chosen. It is very hard, and they have to be super passionate and committed to do what they are doing. And I try to honor them whenever I make wine. But I like the vineyard. I like the Red Mountain AVA because it gets super hot during the day, but super cool at night. So they have these degree changes of about 40 to 50 degrees, which really helps a wine with acidity. Like we have more, 2 more days, I think it's 2 to 4 more longer days than Napa does. So that's why I think when we talk about Red Mountain, a lot of awards are coming, and I think they stand up really well to a Napa cab at sometimes a third to a half of the price. I just love the soils there. There's something about the nose when I smell a Red Mountain Cab or Merlot that is incredible. And the reason I love this Merlot out of Kiona is it's old vine. I mean, 1976 is when this was planted, and yeah, it's just a little piece of history in a glass. That's why I love it.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Well, I'll leave it at that, unless anybody has any other questions, or there's anything else you want to talk about before we go. Looks like we're probably good here. A bookkeeping note for everybody. We're going to have to reschedule this coming Saturday's tasting because the producer had something come up, and I'll get that new date out to you guys as soon as I can, and want to apologize for having to change that on everybody, but we'll definitely get it done. Otherwise,
backup plan. Oh, I was just saying we're working on a fun backup plan if we can't get that producer back on that. I think
Yeah, I think the backup plan could arguably be more fun for everybody than the original plan. So hopefully we can make that happen. Either one will be great. But yeah, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us, and
Thank you.
it was a blast for getting to listen, to you talk, and love to get over there and try some more of your wine soon.
All right, sounds good. Thank you all. It was nice to see your faces. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers, Lisa. Thank you.
Take care.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.